Hey everyone, I just wanted to talk for a little while and also show off something that I'm fairly proud of, despite how simple it is. But first, we're going to do the talking because a little bit of background is required. So, I've been interested in game development since I was very young. I remember being around 7 years old, sitting on the basement floor with my friend playing Zelda 1, which, as far as I know, was the first video game that I'd ever played. And so, video games were a whole new concept for me that absolutely blew my mind. And I remember thinking that it would be really cool to make my own game one day, or my own video game. And that thought stuck with me basically this entire time. And over the course of the last 20 ish years, I have tried to make many games. Actually, maybe even more than 20 years, like 22 years. I think my first attempt at making a game was with Flash MX on a school computer back in 2004, potentially. But the internet was not the resourceful place for learning as it is now, uh, nor drama. So figuring out how to do things relied on there being DeviantArt journals and like websites and blogs that had specifically created tutorials for very specific things, but that was it. In reality, if you wanted to make something that required programming, you had to actually learn the programming language basically from the ground up because there wasn't a lot of resources back when I was a kid. So that flopped and I gave up on it for a while. And then when I was 17 or 18 years old, I found out about a thing called Game Maker, which if you use Game Maker, that's fine. I haven't used it in a long time, but last I remember, it was honestly trash. It was a drag and drop system that did work pretty well, but maybe it was just me not understanding how things were handled because, again, I was still young and I wasn't even good at drawing yet. So I was still going through a lot. And honestly, I was going through a lot until fairly recently, actually. So things were just too stressful. Maybe that's why I couldn't retain things, but I didn't understand a lot of what went into programming, whether it was node based or actually typed out stuff. So I gave up on that. And between the age of 18 and I don't know, 2 years ago, so between the ages of 18 and 32, with years in between, I tried Game Maker again multiple times, Unity multiple times. I tried Unreal Engine. None of my computers could handle it. And that was basically it. I think I even did try Flash again at some point. But regardless, I've tried to make games so many times, and the number one thing that always holds me back is the programming. So, the art's great. I've gotten a lot better at drawing and stuff. As you can see, I'm actually able to like draw really quick things. These aren't great, but I did these in the course of like 5 to 10 minutes very quickly. It's not even a character. I just drew a character. Um, they have no name right now. Suggest one in the comments. But so graphically, I'm pretty good. I can make tiles, I can draw. I have a lot of experience with that, but without programming, it's just art. It's not a game if you can't play it. So, I basically just gave up on the idea. But then I heard about Godot and I thought, huh, they say it's like really super easy. I watched a few videos about it. I was like, that doesn't look too complicated. I can kind of understand what's going on there. So I downloaded Godot 4.2 and I started trying to make my own 2D game. Watched some videos, got the basics of how to make your player move, although I didn't really understand how it was working. So, I wasn't actually really learning much. I was just learning how to type a very specific thing, but I wasn't really learning about how it worked, which is very important. Um, but then I decided to switch gears and try and make a 3D game. I'm like, look, if I'm gonna have to learn a whole programming language already, um, I might as well like learn to make like the ideal game, which is a very toxic trait to have. I bite off a lot more than I can chew a lot of the time, which is exactly what happened. Although I did kind of have a fairly functional prototype for movement and some skills that your character have. It's all very janky, but it kind of worked. But I hit a brick wall and I didn't know how to progress, so the game just kind of sat there and collected dust for a year. And I also kind of like forgot about my Minecraft mod for about a year too. I think both of them probably happened for the same reason. I hit a brick wall with the game, and I kind of just lost interest in all game oriented things for a little while. Just because I felt kind of heartbroken. It's like, oh, I thought I was finally achieving something this time, but I'm stuck and I don't know where to go from here. And that's a fairly normal thing that happens with me. But, it is what it is. These things happen. But point is, I picked up the Minecraft mod thing again a little while ago, and I was needing to make 176 different textures for the 16 different variations of dyes in Minecraft, for the 11 different types of wood in the version of Minecraft that I'm modding. So pale oak is not involved here. Otherwise, it would be 12. But essentially, to do this, it meant that every time I exported a texture, I had to type out the name and then press enter. And these names are like so close, except the color at the end of the name is different. And so I thought, there's got to be some way for me to like generate a bunch of empty data PNG files that just have a name and a file extension that I can just double click, press enter, and there I didn't have to type anything, and I can export 176 files far quicker. So I messaged a friend who I'd actually talked about making a game with multiple times in the past. About how difficult would it be to generate a bunch of empty stuff. We conversed about it a little bit, and I was like, I wonder if you could do that in like Godot. Like, you can generate a save file, and I'm pretty sure you could save you could choose the file extension that it uses. And so I decided to jump over into Godot, and I'm like, this would be fairly simple, right? I just need like a text box to type into, a button to push, and then a folder for the files that get dumped onto. And so within like an hour or two, I had a very ugly but functional prototype that would generate 16 empty files that have the proper name with the proper file extension into a folder in a split second. And that was huge to me. And it made me realize, hold on a minute. I nabbed that in the bud, or nipped that in the bud. I don't know what that phrase is. I punched that thing in the jugular so quickly. And well, I did have to go look up some documentation for the save feature. Basically, everything else I remembered, the node signal setup and attaching scripts and whatever, like all fairly simple stuff, but stuff that I've never been able to remember or understand properly before. And now I did, which was crazy to me. So I spent some time making my little application look pretty, because it is an application at this point that does one job, but it's a very useful job that I'm definitely going to need again as I work on the mod. So pretty awesome. But then we started talking. Me and that friend started talking, and I showed it to them, and they were like, "Hey, that's actually pretty cool. That's a really out of the box idea." And so that kind of started our conversation about making a game together again, and we decided to boot that project up 2 weeks ago, I think, as of recording and uploading this video. And this is not that game. I will not be sharing anything about that game until there's more to it, because right now we're just setting up prototypes. This is not a serious game. I'll explain what this is in a minute. But we started um, kind of actually doing things 2 weeks ago. And I figured, well, if I'm going to be making sprites and stuff, I need a way to test them reasonably. And I can't always guarantee that um, the actual game project is going to have room for these things yet. But I need to make sure they look right in a world with the other sprites that are going to be surrounding them. So I need a test environment. So I popped Godot open and I just programmed a very basic player movement script, sprite switching, um, input buttons, some interaction stuff, like going up to an object and interacting with it. And after I set up all these very basic things, I had to sit back in my chair and I was just like, hold on a second. I remembered all of this? And it was the wildest thing for me because, like I've said before, retaining programming related stuff is not something my brain's ever actually been capable of doing. And so this was a huge surprise to me that I was able to actually remember this stuff. And so during the process of working on this game the last 2 weeks, I've been doing some more programming experiments that would be useful for games. Thinking, hey, maybe I could actually make like something that could go in the game and I could feel really good about myself for having actually programmed a fairly useful portion of the game. And so, while working on sprites and making some music for the game, I decided to try and test out how these songs would sound as they faded in and out because I'm working on trying to make adaptive music for the game, which is going to require programming, but I could just focus on making the separate tracks that make up a vertically adaptive song, um, which is where there's instruments that come in and out adaptively as you go through the game rather than switching songs or switching loops that have different energy. That would be a horizontal flip or a horizontal adaptation. But regardless, I couldn't get the tweens to work for the audio volume, which I know works because I used it in the 3D game I attempted to make like a year ago. And it wasn't working even though it matched my old script. I don't know if I was missing something, but the point was didn't work. I was like, okay, maybe I can make my own thing. I mean, the volume of the audio player is just a float, right? And I can change floats. Maybe I can create something that, based on delta or whatever, can just like gradually increase by a small amount over the course of time, and it can change that small amount to make it, a different value or whatever. And so I started working on a concept and I had one, nearly blew my headphones and my eardrums out because I forgot to set the limit. Uh, or rather, I set the limit, but I typed it wrong. So the limit was actually 10 decibels. And then when I thought I fixed it, it went to 200. Don't ask me. I have dyslexia, I have issues. Um, but I managed to get it fixed and working. And when I went into an area, the music would fade in, and when I left the area, the music would fade out. And I figured out pretty much like within 10 minutes and a little bit of finagling how to turn it into a function that I can call on and just feed it two different little bits of information. And it would create as many separate fade in and fade outs that I wanted. So it wouldn't just be one thing that I'd have to copy and paste a whole bunch of times and change the names of things. It was just a function that I could just call on whenever I needed it. And it was super simple, functional, didn't seem to glitch. I tried pushing it to the edge. I tried to stress test it basically in whatever ways I know how. And it just functioned. It worked properly. I could change the value and get different vibes out of it. And I was like super excited. And that inspired me to do what I'm doing right now. After about a week of working on sprites after that, I said, you know what? I think maybe I might actually be ready to make myself my own little simple game. And so I came up with this little concept, which is just that you are underground and need to get out, but to get out, you have to solve puzzles to go from room to room to get to the, I don't know, the ladder that takes you back to the surface, and you get to go home, which is very Portal esque. Uh, but overall, that is what the premise is. And I thought what I could do here is use this as a platform to not only have made an entire game, regardless of how small, all by myself, just to prove to myself that I can do it, but also I can use it as a platform for learning things. So essentially, there are 5 rooms right now, and I might just leave it there. And each of these rooms has the goal of having a puzzle that is different and requires different types of programming to make it work. That way, I'm actually learning new stuff with every room rather than just repeating the same thing over and over again. And so now we get to the part where I get to demo what I've done. So this little bit here is for anyone who uses Godot, who might actually be experienced in it and is just curious how I've gone about doing things. So the player has 8 directions. I'm using velocity and input vectors to not only change a direction but also flip the sprites around. Those are 2 concepts that I'm still learning to fully understand. I know how they're actually working and how to best use them for multiple things. So that's pretty new. The little green cube you're seeing spin around with my character is a raycast, which this is probably not the best way to do it, but I'm rotating it with the character so that it's kind of tracking what he's or which direction that he's looking. The cube will not be there in the final game. That's just there as a reference for me, but that's right at the tip of the raycast. So I can actually see where the raycast is touching. That way I can guarantee that, it's not hitting things when it should be. It's just a way of debugging and making sure that things are where they should be and reacting as they should be. Honestly, it should be a straight line and not just a cube so I can actually see the path. But overall, it's fine. So that's there. I'm using a polygon shape to wrap the entire building in segments mode, which I just discovered the other day, and I'm like, oh god, that's so much better. But then I also have some buttons here. All the imagery is very basic and just kind of like for prototyping purposes, and the sounds are not final, as you will discover in a moment. But the purpose here is you need to leave through this door, but you can't. It's closed. What do you do? Well, there are 4 buttons. You have to press them in a very specific order. And if you don't, it resets. So if you click a button that you're not supposed to click,
Absolutely not.
you get the error sound, which will be an actual error sound later. But if you click the one that's correct, you get an actual click. And now the first button has been selected, and I'm going to change the color. So there's not only an audio cue, there's also a visual cue that button has been pushed. But if you click the wrong button and click in the same button again,
Absolutely not.
it resets using a function that just resets it. So now I can click it again. And if I go da 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 and click the correct buttons in the correct order. But what if I go, oh, I forget which one I clicked?
Absolutely not.
Oh no, it's all reset. So if I actually go through and click the buttons that need to be clicked in the proper order, you'll notice There's another sound I made with my mouth that opens the door. Yeah, now you can leave. Wow, it's amazing. Also, yeah, there's you can't click the buttons. I was actually thinking I should probably make it so that you can not click the buttons afterwards, but it seems I've already done that. But that's that. There's nothing else. Just a bunch of empty rooms. But this is the first puzzle that I've ever programmed, and it's fairly simple. But it's an actual like game mechanic. And I like put together a game mechanic on my own. I didn't need any documentation other than there was the raycast. I think I needed to look up some like how to detect collisions and stuff, like what the actual tags were for that. But documentation isn't cheating. Nothing's cheating. Whatever way you use to learn is how you're using to learn. So learn. But I did it. So I'm feeling pretty good. And I just wanted to show this off. Um, Mind you, I did say I was going to talk a little bit about the game, the serious hobby game that we're working on together. So there are three of us. One of us is handling the programming, although two of us, if my programming gets good enough, uh, let me start that over. So there's three of us on this team. Our team does not have a name yet, and I'm not going to disclose what the name of the game is yet. But one of us is on programming, one of us is on music, and me, I am on making sprites and tiles and stuff as well as music. But two people on being on music doesn't mean we're necessarily collaborating on the same songs. It's more that they seem to excel very good or very well. My English is amazing. They seem to excel at the more chippy, cheery stuff, like the happy sort of music. But being a metalhead and writing a bunch of depressing songs for most of my life, my forte is making spooky, creepy, moody stuff. Although I am getting better at the chippy, cheery stuff, I figured if all the intense music has a style to it, it'll fit well. And if all the happy stuff has a style to it, it'll fit well. Things could change. We might collaborate on some of the songs. But at the end of the day, I'm probably going to be doing the final mix of everything, making sure that there aren't any like reverb tails getting cut off or whatever, and also trying to put together a bit of a specific instrument set so that whether the song is moody, whether the song is like angry or happy, it's all going to have very familiar instruments just so everything feels nice and consistent. Because while it is a hobby game, I think we're all looking to learn more about game development. One of us might be looking for more musical expertise. One of us might be looking for more graphical expertise, and some of us, more programming expertise. Personally, I want to learn everything. That's just kind of how I am. Regardless of what it is, if it's a creative hobby, I want to know everything about it. And that's why I have way too many hobbies. But overall, we are making a game together. It is official, and I will talk about it at some point when there's more to talk about. And of course, I also get approval from the other people involved because I don't really know what the goal for the game is. Not necessarily in terms of the story or the type of game, but like, is this a game we plan to just make and play ourselves? Is this the kind of game that we actually want to put out there and get it on Steam and whatever? That conversation hasn't quite started happening yet because it's way too early in the process. We're trying to get an actual functional game because if we talk about getting it out there and get all hyped up about it and then we all hit a brick wall and don't know how to proceed for a long while, then kind of a pointless conversation. But overall, that's that. I just wanted to share and talk a little bit about one of the journeys I'm on right now. I'd say the journey, but we all know that I have too many hobbies and I'm on 14 different ones at every point in life, which is why I don't socialize as much as I probably should. But anyways, thank you for hanging out with me for as long as you have. Um, this is a prime time unedited screen share. Yeah. Anyways, this has been Nair's Fancy Things. And guess what? You're the fancy thing.